Future Aquariums of America. Sound right? And it's so perfect for it too. I mean, look at it. A cabinet already pre-fitted to house a thick safety panel in the front of it. Who could ask for more? You can just sit around and watch all the fishies swimming around in captivity. Yeah, no, never. That's not what we're about here. Sorry to break your hearts, y'all, but exotic fish do not lie in this honey's future. Today we've got a 1956-ish Philco 21-inch black and white, and after careful consideration, this is the television I've chosen to really kind of get the ball rolling on this channel. With this video, we're just going to do an overview of it, and I'll give you a backstory on it, how I came by it, and what its history has been as far as I can determine before me, and what its history has been since me. You can see on the table we have a picture tube sitting there. Well, that picture tube is the original and it is not going back into it. But I went ahead and I never throw anything away here, so I went ahead and hauled it down here and got it on display because when I get the back off of this thing, that's going to be kind of important. Back when I bought this old house that I'm in, there was an old chicken coop or chicken house in the backyard. Nothing big and corporate, just an old traditional southern, relatively small Georgia backyard chicken house with that once had a chicken yard out in front of it, and it was piled, floored, and that's dirt floor to ceiling with trash of every kind from previous tenants that had been in this place. And way back there in the corner, covered in cardboard, wrapped up originally, it appears very tight in cardboard, with multiple bed sheets and everything draped down over it. Underneath that cardboard was this. And so it was love at first sight, and so I fished it out of there. And my guess is it had been sitting in there for at least about 30 years because it was just sitting on a pallet at the rear wall of that place, and took about 2 days of cleaning out just to get to it. And I mean, Lord, I wish I had photos of where it came from, but I don't. But it was sitting on a wood pallet, one of the few things in there that just wasn't sitting on literally the ground floor, which was literally the ground. And when I started to uncover it and I saw the grill cloth, I figured, well, it's an old radio or it's a television, and I was expecting it to be totally ruined, but actually it's not too bad. But now that's not to say it's not rough, because it's rough. But all this was back in 2012, and it's had a lot of work done to it since then. And this was actually my daily driver for a couple of years, believe it or not. Just in the condition you see it in. I never did any work on the cabinet. I just basically hauled it out of there and when I got a good look at it, I got so enthused about what it was that I just went ahead and plunged into it and set about making it playable again. Along the way, it's already been recapped, and it's been in use now for about, I'll say about 10 years, roughly 8 to 10 years. And I've just never gotten around to doing anything more with it. And a couple of years ago, back in, 2021, somewhere along in there, it broke down again, and it just got moved to one side and then to another room, and then it got moved upstairs, and then I hauled it back downstairs, and the list goes on. But even though it's not a virgin project, I think it's the perfect one to start the instructional videos on this channel with, because it's so simple. This television actually uses the famed 300 series Philco chassis. This one has a TV 330 chassis in it, and I've done TV 330 chassis and similar ones for other people. I've done several of these for other people down through the years, and I've always wanted one because they are so super simple and so incredibly service friendly. Looking at the back, we can clearly see some of the signs of use and improvisation that it's had done to it. Get down here, we still have a pretty good tube chart, but a lot of the vital information was missing. We don't have a model number, but I think I've pretty well kind of tracked that down. And more about that in a moment. But we've got a pretty good tube chart, and from there I just had to go by the chassis number. But like I said, I'm pretty familiar with these chassis, so that wasn't a huge deal for me. I wish the back was in better condition than it is. I have no idea really what happened right here. It's like, I don't know if squirrels did this, or rats, or if somebody just at some point in this thing's past just for some reason just snatched and pulled that hunk out of the back of it. This right here ought to please RCA people, because this is clearly an RCA connection panel that I retrofitted to it just to be able to use it. So the original terminal board in the back is missing. But if we look right here on the back of the television, we've got a place for a VHF, a single VHF connector, and what looks like this one was originally outfitted with a coax connector. Well, some versions of them were, not this one in particular. I don't think this one ever had that. But yeah, she's going to be a work in progress for a while, so this is really just the first video introducing this thing, because it's going to be a series of videos as we go through it, and I do my best here to try to bring it back to its former glory. It had been, of course, sitting that long in a place like that. It's been visited by rats and probably also squirrels, but that's kind of par for the course for the kind of projects I run across. Kind of interesting the way Philco did the back here, because the chassis in this television is so deeply recessed. I mean, you got your vertical linearity control way back here, and the chassis tucked so far into the cabinet, you'd never stand the slightest chance of ringing that through with any screwdriver or adjustment tool through that hole. And then over here we've got height and width adjustments, and this was always kind of amusing to me when it came to Philco, because how did they expect people to do this? I mean, really, were you supposed to like get down and insert a tool and then squint through all of these little slots here to actually see where your tool was going? Or were you supposed to just prod around in there until you eventually hit something? These two slots right here on either side of the line cord are kind of interesting, because Philco actually had a frame for the interlock on the back that connected, was mounted right here, to extend that in far enough so that you could actually ring the interlock plug on the back of the chassis. So, you know, when it comes to this television, I've seen worse, and I've certainly seen better. The chassis in it isn't the cleanest in the world, but like I said, these chassis are excellent to work on. I was talking about the bed sheets that were underneath the cardboard. Well, of course, back when I originally fished this thing out from its location, when I pulled the bed sheets up, of course, they were stuck to the top of it, and we have the following result here. Finish on it's pretty crazed and cracked. I don't know if I can really pull focus on that, but yeah, we got I was hoping daylight would help me get a shot of that, but you can see all the little tiny ridges and all in there where the finish on the top is coming up. Philco cabinet quality during these years had kind of fallen off. Not that Philco cabinet ruggedness was ever really that great, but they held together and they were very functional, and the cabinets served the purposes for which you know, they housed the television, which is really what Philco shot for. And this television uses Philco's old standby 70-degree deflection system in it. Going back to the picture tube over here, that is a mighty deep picture tube. The original picture tube is a 21 ZP4B, and this is pretty obviously the smoking gun, I think, that got this television done away with, at least as far as its original life goes. A lot of people think it's great, you know, when you find a television and it's still got all the original tubes. Actually, I'm a little bit relieved when I see that the picture tube is non-original in televisions, and this is why. Usually, it's not usual, but it's not uncommon at all that when one still has the original picture tube, that It's pretty well shot. Most televisions from this time period you run across will already be on their second or third picture tube. In fact, one of the last things that quite frequently was done on televisions before they ended up discarded back then was people would have a new picture tube installed. They'd spend the money for a new picture tube, and then the next time it'd break down, they would decide, well, you know, I just dumped a bunch of money into a new picture tube for this thing, and now it's broke down again, and that's when the television would get discarded. But this thing right here was virtually dead. In fact, for those familiar with old televisions and trying to bring them back, this sucker had not one, not two, but 3 brighteners connected to it. 3 picture tube brighteners connected in series with it. And that pretty well told me when I saw that they had squeezed this thing for all the life that it had to give. And sure enough, when I got all those brighteners pulled from it and I tested it, it was essentially dead. But despite all of that, it did actually still rejuvenate just a little bit, and I got a usable picture from this picture tube for about not quite a year and a half, because it did not rejuvenate really worth a darn, but it did rejuvenate enough to produce a usable picture without brighteners being hooked to it. I don't have the brighteners to show you because I had somebody interested in those and I sold them. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I don't really believe in using picture tube brighteners myself. But if we look right up here, I mean, that is actually baked blue in there. Or maybe it was that color originally, but most of the time we don't actually see a blue element inside of the neck of a picture tube around the cathode. We normally, when they're dark like this, that cathode is pretty well cooked. And this happened, I think, as a result of those brighteners having been hooked to it those years. And yeah, somebody really squeezed this picture tube for absolutely just all the life it had to give. But as far as I can determine, this is actually the original picture tube for this television. It was never ever changed out. I'm pointing out the original picture tube because it actually goes to another discussion about this television. I think by the time Philco built this one, they were actually losing favor actually in the market because of the old 70-degree deflection system they had been clinging to for so long. Because, y'all, this cabinet is almost as deep as it is wide. And that was a style that was quickly going by the wayside, I think, by the time this television was built. If you didn't have a corner of a room basically to put one of these televisions in, just look at how far this thing would have stood off from the wall if you had it just backed up to a wall in your house. It's really, I mean, you got a very deep cabinet here, and then you've got this huge tube cup on the back also. And they didn't lend themselves to having a, if you will, a sleek installation. And by the time this television was built, a lot of other manufacturers like Zenith and RCA and GE, they were already moving to 90-degree deflection and 100-degree deflection, and even sharper than that. RCA was on their way to 110-degree deflection, and well, they were more than on their way, they were already there. And their televisions had a much more trim cabinet that was not anywhere nearly this deep. And there was Philco, probably kind of looking old hat to people by the time these televisions were made. But the 70-degree deflection system was hugely tried and true and reliable, and it was a known value, and to servicers it was probably still a welcome sight, because it was just so, compared to sharper deflection angle systems, it was just so easy to work on. Especially the vertical circuits for 70 degree were pretty much a breeze compared to if you've ever worked on televisions that had like 110 degree and tried to get proper linearity and all on them. So for servicers, this would have been a very attractive television. But yeah, as far as home decor goes, this thing would have stood off from the wall just due to the tube cup. Let me get my measuring tape extended. Just from the tube cup, I mean, that's about 4.5 inches, y'all. And that's just the tube cup on the back of this television. That is practically, I mean, that is a full 4.5 inches if the back was actually still, totally perfectly flush against the television. But we've got like 4.5 inches here, and from the front of the cabinet to the back, "21 inches, essentially. 21-inch cabinet depth, not even counting that tube cup. And width-wise, it's only a little better than 26 inches. Which led to this television kind of having a pretty boxy appearance, It just didn't really look sleek ever. It never resembled anything, even back then, that would have qualified as remotely modern design. Another thing that Philco had probably dogging them by this point was the type of chassis design they were using, whereby you had to have all your controls pretty well coming out in the front, down below the screen, because your tuner and your on-off and volume control and all of your picture and sound adjust controls had to extend through the front of the television, and a lot of manufacturers were moving away from that back at the time. You'll notice that the mask around the screen on this actually has some spots in it. Well, when I first fished it out, it was buried about 1/4 of the way up, actually, in debris from rat bed. It had rat bed about up to there in it, so actually the mask is in great shape when you consider that, that it's not oxidized any more than it actually is. Sometime in the past, somebody had obviously struggled to get the safety panel out of this thing, and the cabinet shows signs of that. I presume that would be where that came from. It's a pretty hard area to scratch up where it is, unless you were just trying to remove the safety panel, which actually on this one is 3 trim pieces at the top. You have one at either side, and then they both come together behind a central trim piece up here at the top. So no major operation to remove it, but maybe the wood had expanded back then and it was jammed in there when somebody was trying to remove it to clean the safety panel and the screen on this. Hello, this is me. Grill cloth is in pretty good shape, but it needs to be replaced. I don't know if this was originally pink or red. It got some kind of gold accents strung through it. And it looks like it might have originally been kind of a dark pink, or maybe it was red. I don't know. It's sun bleached as it can be at any rate anyway. This right here was a shame, and this, unfortunately, some point while I was trying to ever get this thing out of there, I never found this piece, but when I first uncovered it, it didn't have that on it. So unfortunately, that's me. So I'll just have to wear that while the television wears it as well. So down along the bottom, not bad, not bad. A lot better than what I would have expected, you know, from something stored the way this was. Because all it had was cardboard, basically. Well, sheets dangling down right here. So, a lot of times on old televisions, you'll usually find them kind of rotted down at the lowest points where damp mop heads and all had gone up against them. People doing housekeeping back then on hardwood floors and all. Talking about the cabinet quality overall, it would have been nice if Philco had actually extended that on back to the rear of the cabinet, I think, but instead they just kind of, on each side, just kind of extended it out a little bit and then cut it off right there. This thing has casters under it, and I'm glad of that. Actually, the sides of the cabinet are pretty decent. All the way up, though. And that's a little problematic for me. I almost wish that the sides were dilapidated like the top is, because then I wouldn't ever have to worry about trying to match the top to the sides. But all the way up on both sides, the side panels are actually in mighty good shape. Well, look at the other one over here. Other than a little bit right here at the top, it's pretty dang good. The side panels are actually the best feature of the cabinet at this point. One of the first things I did was lubricate the casters up under it. But that's kind of another point about this television. Like I said, this actually became my daily driver for a while. A lot of people were interested in this thing when they come into my home and see this old television playing, and they actually didn't make any huge deal about any of the cabinet condition. They were just pretty impressed, you know, that a television this old was sitting there playing like a top. And there's another defect in it that it had actually in its playing due to the picture tube I've got in it, which I've currently got a 90 degree in this, which I swapped in from another television when that other one didn't fix up, and the original picture tube in this finally got to the point where it just was not viewable under any circumstances. But actually sitting back from this in a chair, I think Philco could have done a better job of concealing the casters up underneath it too. But you know, maybe if they done a little different design, you know, because those casters just kind of stick out like a sore thumb, you know, when you're sitting back far enough to notice them. They're clearly visible under it in a halfway decent room light, but still, I went ahead and I lubricated them, and that's not anything that anybody ever noticed either. So let's get into this thing. All right, it's tripod time. Let me get y'all set up here. Finger in the shot, but all right. This television was actually, it shows all the signs of being pretty virgin by the time I came across it. One sign of that is the original back screws still thread in tight. And I couldn't see where any of them had actually been replaced with any larger ones, so I think there were like a couple missing, but pretty rare to find all the original screws in one, and to see all the original screws thread in tight on one when normally one would figure that the television had been worked on many times and screws would be missing and screw holes would be stripped out, but not the case with this one. And we're in. Not bad. Not bad at all. Of course, yeah, that's partly due to me. But other than it still having the original picture tube and rat bed and potentially squirrel bed in it, this is pretty much how I found it. You will see that it's already got a newer replacement filter capacitor right there. Later on I did that with it once it had started showing its worth to me. And we've got some chassis oxidation, and due to Philco's shallow apron design, we got a filter choke right here that protrudes up through the top, and you can see that it's been visited and nibbled on a little bit, but it's still working fine. They didn't get entirely through the outer wrapping on it, so why replace it when it works? But yeah, they kind of crawled through it and left their signs and marks. But it was not too bad at all. I mean, really, a lot better than what I had expected when I was originally going into it, actually. Here's another provision I made a while back, just trying, when I was getting this thing up and going, and I suspect that's the part that is now bad in it. And right here on the tuner, that's some of my improvisation also, because the original input assembly on the tuner, that was transformer type, electrolysis had done its job on it, and those thin wires were eaten into from corrosion. And I keep these things right here handy whenever I junk out a television with the manual tuner. I always save the isolation network because I frequently find that I need them for old tuners and televisions like this. So I intend to rewind the transformers on the original input assembly for this tuner through the course of these videos and reinstall that, and we'll get a comparison of, does it work better with the newer part or does it not, That's one of the things I want to do with this television while we're into it. This is going to be a series of videos, y'all, because yeah, this thing, it needs a lot of love. I've seen far, far worse, and I have seen better, and most of the better I've seen has belonged to other people. I generally end up with the orphans that others have left behind. I was talking about the picture tube a while ago, and this is the 90-degree deflection that it's got in it now as compared to the original 70-degree, and you can see it's a much shorter picture tube. It's got a short neck on it, which does not even come out as far as the rear cabinet of the television. This is out of a 1956 Olympic that was in far worse condition than this, that I tried and tried and tried with, and I mean to try some more with. There'll be another upcoming project, but it beat me. It beat me time and again, and finally I decided to put it aside. But it had a good non-original picture tube in it. The original picture tube in it had been a 90-degree deflection, and this is a replacement that had been installed in it, a Silvertone labeled replacement. This is a Silvertone labeled 21 CBP4, 21 CBP4A, which electrically was, very good to use in that Olympic back when somebody years past, changed out the original picture tube in it. So I needed a good functional picture tube for this one. So yeah, it produced some linearity trouble and a little linearity error, and not noticeable to most people other than me. And it produces a neck shadow because people who are familiar with old televisions like this will notice that the focusing magnet assembly is absent, which also contains the picture centering adjustments. But it plays very well without that, and unlike the original picture tube in this, which is magnetically focused, this one right here is electrostatically focused. So I improvised, well, I didn't even have to improvise. Some versions of this television obviously already were electrostatically focused. So Philco provided, for other versions of this chassis for using those, they already provided a ground wire, which is usually what you'll see that extra focus electrode attached to when you run across televisions like this. And this one gave a very bright, and still gives a very bright and sharp and detailed picture. But more about that in a moment, because I mean, in a future video, we are going to actually install another 70-degree deflection picture tube in this and get it right, because this television has won my loyalty down through the years. I mean, it's played its butt off for me. Talking about Philco cabinet quality during these years, you'll notice that we don't have a full chassis floor in this one, which, really and truly, you don't necessarily need one, but the chassis in this television just sits on two wooden planks, which leaves it open underneath. And probably if it had a full floor in it for the chassis, the rack beds and everything in it would have been far more extensive than they were. So that actually works out pretty well. This right here is another improvisation of mine. After I'd sold the brighteners, I found it necessary before installing this picture tube to install a step-up transformer for the original picture tube, and so I wired this in parallel with the primary of the power transformer to basically squeeze yet even more life out of that old roached out picture tube. But I'm going to be removing this because hopefully I've got a good picture tube now to install in this, which will give it the full screen and everything that it's been lacking. And so that's a provision I'll be undoing. One thing about this, when I first hauled it out of there, that really amazed me, it goes back to an earlier section of this video. Check this out. This is the original factory speaker for this television. After 30 years, I would estimate, of sitting inside a backyard chicken house with a dirt floor, this is still the original factory speaker for this television, and I was shocked. I was genuinely shocked to find it intact. I didn't do anything. I've never even had it out. All I did was just lightly, using compressed air, blow trash out of this. That is the original factory speaker with the original cone still in it, in absolutely immaculate condition. And while we're down here at it, I want to make another point about this speaker, because the part number on it came in very handy for me. 36-1651-13. And I was talking about earlier that on the back of the television, the model number was missing and other vital information was missing, and I really like to have all that information still with the old television or radio when I find them. But sometimes an obscure, innocent looking part like the speaker can really be an informative thing if you know how to use it. Like I said, I've done several of these chassis for people down through the years. Different versions, slightly different, but this basic chassis is one of the most common ones you will find in old Philco table model and console televisions. This basic chassis is exceptionally common, and all the ones I had ever done before, I never even had service data. Y'all, this is such an easy chassis to repair. Just about anybody that's ever recapped and retubed an All-American 5 AM radio would stand an excellent chance of repairing one of these chassis without even having service data on them. I'm telling you, they are that good. They are just that good. They are that service friendly. Maybe I'm not supposed to point on YouTube, but I'm doing it anyway. I have never had the first major problem or issue ever working on any chassis in this series. Right up here in the top of the cabinet, that's my own scribbling, basically. And though I'd never had service data on any of these televisions before, I finally, since I got one of my own, I went ahead and I acquired service data on this, and actually the part number on this speaker was just awesome for me, because it turns out this particular speaker, out of 40 plus models that used this version of this chassis, this particular speaker was only used in 2 of them. And that was really amazing to me. So, it's fun to just kind of, use clues that you find through these things to try to obtain information which is lost off of them through the years. I was finally able to determine the model number of this television. So the big unveiling is, this was a Philco model 22D4158. Because I narrowed it down to 2 possible models because of the part number on that speaker. And to me, that is just what this is all about. That's part of what this hobby is all about. Investigating and finding clues and piecing together a puzzle to get more and more information, if possible, on radios and televisions where essential labeling and documentation might be missing. So I was very, very happy that Philco, for some reason, only used this particular part number speaker in 2 models. And I can't see why, because the other speakers were like this one, pretty much, 8-inch. I don't know what the difference was. Maybe a slight difference in wattage or cone design, or probably all of them were the same impedance too, but this particular one was only used in 2 models. While I'm down here, since this thing's sitting on planks, I'll go ahead and give y'all a shot of the underside, what's visible of it under here. And you can see that the underside of this chassis was just as clean as a pin, and really still pretty much all original underneath. I'm going to have to rediscover with y'all in a future video, when I pull this out and we start work on it in earnest, what all I did to it back those years ago. But I always, as much as I can, I save the original parts just to go back to once in a while, because they make a really handy reference sometimes when you're doing future work on something years after you initially worked on it and got it up and functioning. It's always nice to just kind of keep the original parts and having to go back to and look at. But yeah, I wasn't expecting to hit that lucky. And I've still got all the original hardware for the neck of the picture tube. When I get the replacement, which I'm hoping and trusting is good, installed in this, because I'm really looking forward to that. But right now, I'm not going to go ahead and just jump into reinstalling the picture tube, because information with the replacement picture tube is missing. Also, I don't know whether or not it requires an ion trap or not. And rather than guess at all that, in these situations, what I like to do is go ahead and get the chassis working with the picture tube it's got. And that way, if I have a problem after installing the new picture tube, I'll know right then that the chassis is good and that something went wrong with the installation of the new picture tube. But yeah, this television, I think, despite its appearances, it has earned a new picture tube. Okay. Good coffee. And my modified coffee mug here. Yeah, it might be time for a new one, but this actually comes in pretty handy, y'all. This way I don't have to worry about a handle breaking off while I'm grabbing a sip of coffee and then coffee spilling down into something. I just have to lift the whole thing. So it actually comes in pretty handy. Talking about that I never throw anything away here. Here is the original Interlock assembly from the back of this television. And I want y'all to just study this for a moment. For one thing, we'll go ahead and do a measurement of it. Because from the back of the television, because this part right here does not recess into the chassis. It does not have, the chassis doesn't have a recessed interlock plug. So y'all just study about this for a moment, that from here to the back, that is a solid 3 1/4 inches that the chassis is actually recessed into the cabinet of this television. Talking about those slots in the back that you were supposed to be able to reach through to be able to adjust anything internally while the back is on the television. So yeah, think about that for a moment. So a while ago when I was taking the back off, that was just pretty standard, but if you look at this thing, you'll notice it's got snaps right here on this plate. This plate actually slips underneath the chassis when the back goes on originally. You put the back on, and then this plate actually slips into a slot, a locating slot in the chassis. And then you press the back on once it engages the interlock, and these snaps lock it in place. This is one piece of hardware I absolutely will not be going back with, because I've got this arrangement right here in place, and yeah, we got some rot starting there on this. All of my cheater cords are old, but yeah, here's the interlock, and notice it is not recessed in the chassis. And then you take this when the back cover is being put on the television, and it slips in there, and then you press the back on the television. until those two tabs lock underneath and inside of this little slot here. That's all well and good when you're putting one together, but you should have seen me the first time I was trying to ever get the back off of this television, trying to get the back to release right here because of these little snaps right here. They had it thoroughly just doing their job. The way Philco Design had it totally locked in place, and man, I tugged and I wiggled and I pried, and I eventually had to lay this thing over on its side and come in from underneath to finally work that loose. Now, you know, imagine years ago being on a house call, which, yeah, you know, once upon a time, believe it or not, TV men used to actually make house calls. But imagine hitting this situation in a customer's home. You know, she's got you know, her family photos, her flower arrangements and everything, you know, the way people would do, you know, totally decorating these cabinets, you know, for their home, because these cabinets were furniture. And imagine being in a customer's home, if you will, and actually having to clear all that off inside a customer's home and lay one of these televisions over on its side, potentially on a hardwood floor, which a lot of homes back then had. So you'd find that on a lot of installations. And maybe you do, or maybe you don't. If you're lucky, I guess you'd have a blanket with you know, so you could actually provide a protective service to actually lay the television down on. But imagine having to wrestle with this in a customer's home. I mean, as far as holding the interlock in place, it worked very well. And oh yes, it works extremely, exceptionally well at that. I had to come in from underneath just to finally work that thing loose out in my yard, just to originally get the back off of this television to clean all the rat and squirrel bed and everything out of it. So this is one piece of hardware that I will not be going back with under any circumstances. In fact, I really need to, because actually we don't have any rot going on this one. If you look, this one's free of it, and the newer one that I was using has melt rot occurring. All right, so I guess that's a testament to the quality back then. I need to actually get this off and go ahead and just make me another cheater cord out of this, or maybe, you know, go ahead and use this end again to be the power connection to the chassis. I mean, it's obviously higher quality than the one I'm using with it right now. So, but yeah, I will never reinstall this, because once it is snapped in place, trust me, if you've never worked on one of these, it's there. It is very, very there. But these two tabs back here in the back would have protruded through these two slots here in the back of the television, if I can still get them to fit. Oh, come on. There, we got one. What about the other one? Come on, get in there. Get. There we go. There we go. Yeah. And then these two tabs were originally folded over here on the outside. And that was your safety provision to keep people from getting shot back then. Well, I know to not get how to avoid getting shocked on these. So yeah, that frame and everything will not be going back. That'll become scrap material from now on. A while ago when I took it off, I didn't give y'all a view of the inside of it. But here we have the inside of it. And you can see where this actually looks more like roaches did this down through the years. Where that foil is just eating away, eating away, eating away. I'm not really going to worry about that too much either, but back when this television was made, X-radiation was a primary concern and a nightmare scenario of a lot of people. So the foil lining glued into the back of televisions back then actually served two purposes. And one of those purposes was it was supposed to be a barrier to X-radiation coming out of the back of the television while still allowing adequate ventilation. Another thing in televisions that didn't have the chassis recessed a full 3 1/4 inches inside the cabinet, this was actually good heat shielding back at the time, and the thinking was that heat from the tubes and everything and transformers and all would be reflected back and then back up and on out higher up in the cabinet. And this type of material lining the backs of televisions back then was considered a safety measure against fire too. Now, anybody like me that's been working on more modern equipment ever since the 80s, and I actually pretty well retired from the most modern equipment and all back in 2012. It's interesting to look at old televisions like this and the way they were built back then, and then just marvel at all the lengths they went to for safety back then that just are not used in any televisions in more recent history. Very few televisions beyond the late 1970s ever had any foil lining in the back of them for X-radiation or for heat reflection or any other purpose. It just wasn't there in a whole lot of them. And also, we've got the high voltage compartment inside a steel cage inside of these old televisions, and that was very handy to back when people were concerned about flyback transformers catching fire and houses burning down and all from that. This was a safety provision against all that, having all of that contained inside of heavy metal shielding like this. And even the B+ fuse, and this one is contained right here. This fuse is actually on the center tap of the high voltage winding of the power transformer to kill the B+ in case of an overload. But yeah, all the provisions and all that were made just to avoid fire and everything, and to control fire if fire broke out in televisions made all these decades ago, that most later televisions, even up into the 60s, they just started eliminating all kinds of safety provisions like this. So I wanted to address that right quick because so many people look at old tube type equipment and think, gosh, what a fire hazard. Gosh, what a fire hazard. They see all those hot heaters and filaments glowing inside of them, and they feel that heat rising up from power transformers that get too hot to leave your hand on, and they just think fire, fire, fire. And actually, I mean, look at the design of these old chassis, and fire would have a very tough time ever escaping. And then we come up to televisions, you know, in later years. Actually, the majority of picture tube type televisions, all in all, I think that were made as the 60s came to a close. So much of this was just omitted, and flyback transformers were totally unshielded. And believe me, sometimes they still caught fire. Yes, they did. And very few homes that probably ever burned down from them. But the point is, back when these televisions were made, all of that was thought about. They really obsessed on reducing fire hazard every way possible. And what would really burn in this? I mean, you don't have any circuit boards. You've got a wood cabinet, yes, but wood cabinetry was continued right on for decades. And in those, you had unshielded flyback transformers. You had circuit boards that, take my word for it, would flame up and burn. And especially in projection televisions. And you had CRT boards, kind boards as they're commonly called, plugged right into the neck of the picture tube. And take my word for it, I've seen those things burn before too. And then you had these closely contoured backs on modern televisions where you've got like a plastic back coming up, you know, like that close over it. And I've seen burned CRT boards inside of televisions where really the back covers were just, you know, like maybe at max giving about that much clearance from any fire that broke out. And yet tube type equipment is the type of equipment that people always associate fire with. Really, most tube type equipment was as secure from fire as it could be, because back when equipment like this was made, fire control in the event of fire was a major obsession of manufacturers. They just simply did not cut all these corners and all back when televisions like this were built. Let's see, coming down, not a whole lot left to show you. Up here in the top, I'm going to leave this in place. I might cut that twin lead off just because, well, it can dangle kind of close to the yoke. But a lot of televisions you'll find from this era will have either the full thing intact or the remains of what used to be an internal cabinet antenna, which quite often took the form of a foil lining being glued up in the top of the cabinet or elsewhere in the sides of the cabinet, or some of them would have it down low, you know, in the lower part of the cabinet behind the speaker. And I don't really know how to grade them, because down here in rural South Georgia, they were totally useless. You just didn't have, you know, any kind of, you couldn't tune in anything hardly at all with an internal cabinet antenna. But now, you know, if you lived in like a New York high-rise or something, or a high-rise out in California and all, these antenna systems that were contained in television cabinets like these, In situations like that, they might have worked and worked very, very well. If anybody out there has anything to say about that, please do. But I tend to kind of leave this stuff in place, and probably what I'll do is I'll just kind of secure this up and out of the way. And maybe I'll leave it coming out through the back just for the sake of originality, but I don't know. Thus far, I've just left it in place because I usually do. And it's still pliable. I mean, bend it sharp and it just does not crack. Think of how old this is, you know, from the mid-50s till now, and it's still pliable. You know, so look at the kind of material that televisions and radios back then were built with. It's really fascinating. Okay, also here as promised is all the original hardware that is currently off of this television, including the original focus magnet and centering assembly, which I will finally have the opportunity to try and reuse on a replacement picture tube. Due to the short neck of the one that it's got in it right now, it was just impossible to reinstall all of that and never have it all line up properly. So I'm going to try to reuse it on the new electrostatically focused picture tube that I've got for this thing. Still, you know, fingers crossed that that tube's good. But this is the first Philco of this series I've seen where all of that was even still present. Most of the time when you have a television that was originally outfitted with magnetic focus, and some of them, like this one, had a permanent magnet in place for that, and older ones had an electromagnet in place for that. When those picture tubes were later changed out with one that was electrostatically focused, all of that gear just disappeared from them. And like I said a while ago, you know, most televisions of this vintage that you run across, they're already on their second or third picture tube, some of them even more. And all that gear just, you know, years past, somebody installed an updated replacement and just left it all off, and they worked fine, and all of that gear just got lost. So I'm very intrigued at the idea of whether or not it has to be done away with, or whether it can be reused on a picture tube that is electrostatically focused. But I've still got that, and most electrostatically focused picture tubes as well do not use the beam bender magnet. Now, a lot of people call these ion traps, but actually the technical term is beam bender, because the ion trap is actually an internal part of the picture tube, and this just allows it to function. So this is actually called a beam bender. But I've still got that. This is the one that was originally on this television. You can see I actually had the poles on it marked, but there were different types of beam bender magnets, and you had to be kind of careful on picture tubes that used one of what type you put on. So I don't ever throw these things away. A lot of times, in fact, you'll find newer televisions with electrostatically focused picture tubes where you'll find an assembly like this mounted on the horizontal output tube to minimize spark Hawkins Bark Hawkinson, well, oscillation. My tongue isn't working right to pronounce it right now, but Barkhausen oscillations, which would cause kind of dark shadow bars on the left side of a screen, originating in the horizontal output section, and installing these on the horizontal output tube would minimize or eliminate that. And I know Magnavox used to use this trick a lot on horizontal output tubes, but here's the original beam bender magnet for the ion trap for the original 70-degree deflection picture tube that was in this television. This is the only one I've ever seen with one of these series chassis that actually all this gear was still in place. And of course the tax I pay for it is, you know, a flat picture tube, but the bracing and everything, I want to try to reinstall this at least. And you see the factory label here, replaced with Philco type 21ZP4B only. Well, most of the time updated replacements came along and they were used, and even universal replacement picture tubes were used, so that's commonplace, so we're not going to worry about not having the exact 21ZP4B picture tube. But I just want y'all to see in this video that I do still have all of that. I've got the ring to tighten the retainer bands for the yoke and everything that goes around these hooks right here. I really had to kind of stretch these things out to improvise mounting this picture tube in this thing, because it is a totally different deflection from the 70 degree. It's a sharper deflection, so didn't quite ever manage to get a full screen on it, but you'd be surprised how few people even notice that. But here's a piece of hardware from the front of the cabinet that might be reused one day, but I don't hold out a whole lot of hope that it will be. And here's more bracing and mounting gear and all to use for the focusing and centering assembly. A lot of times the centering assembly has proved to be kind of superfluous. Most televisions I've seen where all of this has been left off, you still had a very good centered picture just without a centering assembly. So if you come across newer televisions that had a plastic cup coming up toward the back of the yoke and it's all rotted and deteriorated, as it commonly is, especially in RCAs, and it's just falling all down into the chassis and all, and the centering rings will be just sliding around loose on the neck of the picture tube. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. You can have a very good centered picture without all of that. So don't ever look at a rotted yoke cover and think that the yoke is bad either. I did go ahead and slip this back in place just to have a barrier between my hand at times and the high potential connections of the yoke inside of this. So that got to stay with it at least. And let me get her turned around here, and we'll explore this piece right here as the sun continues to sink in the sky. I was going to go ahead and fire it up in this video, but I think I'm just going to wait till the next video on this to do that, because if I go ahead and do that, that's going to get us into a discussion of all the problems and work that I had to do on it already. That, you know, we're getting into kind of a long video here, so I'm just going to let this be an introduction, but this metal piece right here originally was mounted up here in the front of the television, and it held a trim piece in place, which was not on this television when I uncovered it. I searched high and low, and I raked, and I even swept, and I sifted for any remains of that. But these were originally thumb wheel adjustments. You can see where I just installed a couple of screws there to fill in the holes on these knobs. But these were originally thumb wheel adjustments, and there was an S cushion that went from about here all the way across to the tuning knob over here, and it had the Philco logo on it, and it had these knobs hid on the top, but they were what were called thumb wheel adjustments, where basically you would just reach down underneath it and turn these knobs where they stuck out underneath that trim piece. You can kind of see the outline of where this thing right here was mounted. But it's not totally beyond the realm of possibility that I might find that trim piece, but it's not very likely. But I'm going to hang on to this anyway, just in case one day I do. These little brass covers right here, I had some, and they were already kind of antiqued and all, and where the S cushion had little protrusions in it that went into holes that were in the center of these knobs to hold them steady while you were adjusting them from underneath and helped them turn. I wanted to cover those up, so I just kind of I used amazing goop. These are just gooped on. They can be removed. But they were just the right size, basically, to dress it up a little bit. So all of that can be reverted back to original if I ever come across that trim piece. So other than that, yeah, this thing's needing a lot of love. We got a lot of pitting here in this bottom trim, which I cleaned up at the time just roughly the best I could. And in places it's pitted kind of deep, actually. So the side trim and all, the higher up you go, of course, the better it looks. But I'm going to try to rework this somehow, and I was thinking, about painting it and all, but that might ultimately end up being the solution for a while, at least short term. But some of these pits here, I mean, they're really kind of recessed. They're deep. And I am not a cabinet man, so through the series of videos we do on this TV, I'm going to be trying something new. I've gotten interested in maybe electroplating this. Antique Electronics Supply has electroplating kits, and I have never tried electroplating anything before in my life. So here, where there really isn't a whole lot to lose, basically if I could smooth this up, get it decent, because I'm not going to be able to achieve perfection on this, because I'm a chassis man, y'all. I'm not a cabinet man. But pretty much anything would be an improvement, don't you think? So I'm going to try that at some point too, because again, this television has won my loyalty. It was my daily driver for a couple of years, actually more than a couple of years. Once I got this picture tube in it, it just played and played and played and played and played. So I have decided this thing really deserves a good, as good as I can manage, a good restoration on it. I don't know about the mask around the picture tube, because finding any paint to even remotely match that, and it appears to be powder coated on. I don't know. I really think I could stand to just leave that, because you see the way the light reflects off of it and all, as it was designed to, so well. I'm doubting that I could ever, with my limited experience on trying to work with details like this, ever get a finish on it that's as smooth and reflective as, and the right shade as it originally was. So that's not actually too bad. I've seen people before dress them up and just kind of, leave that and call it patina. So it's not really rusted in there. It's just, well, it is in places, but hey, 1956 Philco. And talking about the sides of the cabinet, they are really in good condition. And then there's the top. Well, back when I was using it, I did like people, did back then. I had stuff sitting on top of it, which I kind of had all this just, covered back when I was using it. But this really looks to me kind of like Philco painted the wood grain onto this when they originally finished it. And the odds of an amateur cabinet man like me ever being able to really come close on this, not so good. So I don't really know what I'll do right here. Any cabinet people out there, by all means, make suggestions, right down to product brands and tools and material to use, because for all of my success in working on chassis, this right here is normally something I don't get into. I have normally never gotten into trying to do cabinet work. Normally, when I'm doing it for customers, I'm working on the chassis, and in the meantime, the customers themselves are refurbishing the cabinets, or while I'm working on the chassis, they've got the cabinet in a professional shop somewhere and got somebody who's really knowledgeable about all that doing a job on the cabinet. And then after the cabinet's finished and my chassis work is finished, we just, remarry the two. So that's really, if I had the money, and maybe I'll scrape up the money to do that. Just get somebody to, really professionally, rework the cabinet on this thing. But yeah, Philco is kind of fond of having basically painted on wood grain. And that's what this appears to be. Y'all let me know, because of course through this video I haven't even had the lights on in here, because I think daylight kind of shows the physical condition of this television a lot better. But she needs some love. She needs some love. But I'm sure, I can do a vast improvement over what it has been so far. The speaker grill will be one of the last things that I tackle because I want to research different patterns and everything. I'm not really obsessed on keeping that original. It depends on, what would go with or look just really nice with the cabinet by the time the cabinet's all, at the point where I'm satisfied with it. But on the other hand, there's people out there who really specialize, in textiles who, y'all, chime in if there's anybody like that, cause the more I look at it, the more I think this was probably very dark pink or red with silver or gold accents running through it, and it's not in terrible condition. It's kind of, it's kind of frayed in places, but it's not in terrible condition. So maybe try re-dyeing it, pull it out of there, get an approximation of its original shade, which would still be visible where sun hasn't been able to reach it and bleach it. Re-dye it, but I've never done that before on anything either. So anybody who knows anything about textiles and re-dyeing, please, hit me with some comments, and recommend, write down the product brands and everything, what to use. And if I end up using any of these products recommended by cabinet people or textile people, I'll certainly credit them in the video. I certainly will. I'll credit whoever made the suggestions. I'll credit everybody because I really do want to get this thing back up as near as I can get it in Class A condition. I still hate that blemish right there. I will always notice that. The best I can do with that, I will always know that happened while I was trying to fish it out of that chicken house, but oh well. Hit me up with some comments, y'all, if anybody has any idea, because this is probably going to be a project I'll be coming back to again and again on this channel. It's going to have to be, because what I want to do first is get the chassis in it functional again. I want to have a fully functional chassis, and I want to tackle that first because I am a chassis man. And once we've got the chassis fully functional, then I want to tackle putting another picture tube in, and along the way hit and touch on the cabinet and try various things on it to see how it shapes up. And ultimately, I never even did an alignment on this. It really just has such good picture and sound, like it is. I never did any alignment on this, and we'll try an alignment job on it and see if that provides any real improvement. I'm sure, as far as an oscilloscope is concerned and all, that there's probably a lot of improvement to be had, but will it be visible in actual performance? So we'll eventually get down to doing alignment and see what kind of improvement that gives. And here we've got the box containing what ought to be just about all of the original chassis components. I'm sorry this isn't a virgin project for those who would have wanted to see this television in its original condition, but I'm not going to put it back to its original condition just for a YouTube video. But here's the box containing all, or nearly all, of the original parts that I replaced in this. And in the next video, when we begin chassis work, I'm going to take y'all on a chassis tour once we get it pulled out. And these chassis are so service friendly and simple till I'm just going to be able to very effectively point out everything basically you can do to get one of these televisions fired up and going without having y'all to actually suffer through a recapping video or anything. Because really and truly, these series Philco chassis are the most service-friendly, serviceman-friendly, servicewoman-friendly, service-person-friendly chassis I've ever worked on. And a final note, because I've had this picture tube sitting here totally exposed through all of the video so far, and I'm going to be getting this thing out of here not because it really makes me nervous. I've been handling picture tubes for decades, but I need the bench space back, and I do want to tell y'all to please, please, please do be careful ever handling a television picture tube, because if one should ever implode, y'all, these suckers just basically, you'd be surprised how much of them just basically go to powder, airborne powder, looking like smoke if they ever do implode. So I have had one picture tube to implode on me throughout my life, and I was actually holding it at the time that it did it. So do be extremely careful ever handling a television picture tube. They are exceptionally high vacuum, and if you do bump one wrong or too hard, they will implode. And what happens when a picture tube implodes? Glass from this side flies in and out that direction. Glass from this side flies out the other direction. Glass here would fly toward the wall, and the glass back here would come straight at me. So do be exceptionally careful handling television picture tubes. But talking about the ion trap being inside the picture tube and the beam bender magnet, I've seen a lot of do-it-yourselfers basically doing these wrong, that can cause picture tube damage as well. So I might have to turn a light on here, but let me see if I can find a good angle where the neck isn't reflecting too bad. Right up here, and what from this angle is the top of it, you see I've got a couple of lines drawn on this. You want the magnet right over this very first gap. This very first gap here. You want between this and this. This is where you want it. I'm going to do a video about picture tubes, and that'll include adjusting the beam bender magnet around the ion trap. But actually the ion trap is an internal part of the picture tube. If you look, you'll notice that the gun is not linear. You don't have a linear space here. You notice that's actually cut or shaped at an angle, to be more precise. Right there, this is your ion trap inside the picture tube. This is your ion trap. This is where they get trapped, right up in here. And there's different ways of going about it. Some picture tubes will have guns in them that look like they're actually bent, like the picture tube has been dropped hard or something and everything's been knocked out of line. There's a bent gun design. for picture tubes with ion traps, and you basically want the magnet right here, right shooting right over my nail. You want the magnet centered over this gap right here, right at the plug of the picture tube, but not all the way back up here. You want that magnet centered right here. The lines as I've got them drawn kind of might look deceiving, but that's where you want the beam bender magnet when you have to use one on the neck of a picture tube. I've seen people, let's see if I can spread this thing without having to, no I can't. Okay, I'll be right back. Right there, that's where you want it. You want it over, you want the magnet over that gap. You don't want it back here at the neck, at the end of the neck. You don't want it down further. You want the magnet over that gap right there. And then you adjust these things by rotating it around the neck of the picture tube until you have maximum brightness. I want to go ahead and give y'all some pointers on that, just since I've got a picture tube sitting right here. You're not concerned with picture linearity. You are not concerned with the centering of the picture. The sole one and only thing you are concerned with when properly adjusting a beam bender magnet for an ion trap is maximum screen brightness. Only when you have got the maximum screen brightness is the beam bender magnet positioned so you have maximum ion rejection and have electrons firing at the screen of the picture tube and not ions being fired at the screen of the picture tube. Ions will quickly destroy the phosphor on the screen of a picture tube. So this is where you want it, and rotating it is going to affect the picture centering. It's going to maybe affect the focus. It's going to maybe affect the linearity. But at the end of the day, you adjust all that with the other net gear and the controls on the chassis. You do not sacrifice screen brightness for any of that when you are adjusting an ion trap. If you value your picture tube, if you value the phosphor inside that screen, you focus on screen brightness alone. And with that, I promised myself that I was going to conclude this video before dark, and there hasn't really been any need to have the lights on in here thus far through this, so I'm going to go ahead and wind this video up, and beginning in the next video on this television we'll get into the chassis and we'll go through everything that I did originally to get it going. I'm going to get this honey right here to a safe location, and I'll get her back boxed up where she was. But for the purpose of this video, I decided it was best to just go ahead and have her totally exposed for a while. I'm not particularly nervous of brown picture tubes, even though, like I said, I did have one that I was actually handling one time, a 25-inch color picture tube that actually spontaneously imploded on me. But out of Lord, I don't know how many I've handled. That's a one-time event, and it did scratch me up. It did bloody me some when it happened, but I still got both my eyes. I can still see, and I survived it. But do be careful with television picture tubes. I don't really know what else to include about this one, this project right now. Everything else I could get into is better saved for the next video. So we're going to do that. And in the meantime, the other advice I'll give for anybody who's never worked on this type of equipment before, one of the first things I want to do in the next video is show y'all why you should never ever just drag something out, even if it's in far, far better condition than this one was, even if it looks brand new. Anything like this that has been sitting for so long, I want to, in the next video, address also why you do not just go drag something like this out of storage and plug it in and leave it, power it up, and expect it to work. So, yeah, I mean, I want to teach y'all. You can learn it from a lot of other YouTube videos too, but I'm going to harp on it as well. You don't want to burn up a power transformer. So I'm going to walk y'all through that as well, how to save a power transformer and everything, and not cause any further chassis damage when you're venturing into a project like this. I'm really glad that somebody took the time and care years ago to wrap this thing up so good and try to keep it. And I know the mentality because having started in all this work back in the 80s, I know what the story is when I find them like this. Y'all, it was not discarded. Televisions like these were not discarded. Probably what happened was they were wanting somebody to put a picture tube in it back then, and they never found anyone. This television wasn't really held on to, probably because of its cabinet quality or its looks or because of any sentimental reasons, although, I mean, some people hold on to them for that as well, you know, because maybe it was the first television, you know, that had ever been in their family or whatever. But when you find something like this that's been stuck back and wrapped up and, you know, with the intent, you know, of trying to keep it preserved from the elements and everything, normally what originally happened was, in the case of televisions, they couldn't find anybody to work on it anymore. All the dealerships and everything, they wouldn't even take them in, you know, they just turned people away at the door with them, and they couldn't find service for these things anymore. They come up with all these excuses of, oh no, it's obsolete, oh no, it's ancient, oh, you can't get parts for those anymore. Now think about that for a moment. Parts that people like me are still finding and getting for them today, they weren't available back in the late 60s or 70s. Yeah, right. But when you find something like this, bear in mind that it was probably put back with the hopes that one day, you know, they'd keep searching around and they'd find somebody to repair it for them. The throwaway mentality just wasn't around back then. And people held on to things for a reason. Televisions weren't something you could just go out to Walmart and replace. And you sure, even the least expensive ones out there, you know, you were going to peel off a few dollars for. It was not a throwaway society back then. People held on to them in hopes of finding somebody to repair them, and then just over time they never did, and eventually they just ended up like this one, you know, stowed away and forgotten. Anyway, This one's not going to be stowed away and forgotten again. Not in my lifetime, at least. I'm going to save this, honey. So until next time, y'all take care of each other and get out there and try to find some projects that you're interested in and have some fun, and we'll see y'all next time. Get a hobby shop. We're out.